Cambridge members. This is not my first time in Cambridge, but it is my first since I returned as an ambassador. My first incarnation in the United Kingdom was a student at Hughes, but I chose London rather than the beautiful Cambridge. I was at the London School of Economics 20 odd years ago. But I lived in another Cambridge. I lived in Cambridge. Before I start, I would like to thank the Cambridge Union, all those involved, Phoebe, and I don't want to forget anyone, Shivani, Posh, Calvin, who has given us such a beautiful, informative tour an hour ago. And my friends and scholars, you invited me to talk about Palestine. So this is beautiful. I know people often look to Palestine with a sense of eyebrow raising, eye rolling, the troubled old Middle East sort of reaction. For those not directly involved, there must be a real temptation to simply shrug your shoulders at what has come to be seen as an intractable 100-year-old broken records. Too long. Same story, again and again. But this is simply not true. There is absolutely nothing intractable about our conflict, which is in fact, is really not a conflict at all. A conflict happens between two equal. Our situation is way more simple than that. It is a quest by the Palestinian people to have their rights, the same rights as all other peoples in the world, upheld and respected. I think, in fact, this is a very helpful way to think about Palestine. There is no conflict. There is a quest for rights. As the struggle of a people to enjoy their full rights after having been denied them for so long. And the rights we are denied, in fact, point us forward towards resolution. Palestinians do not enjoy the right to self-determination. We don't. The right to freedom from oppression. We don't. The right to protection. We don't. The right to return for refugees, including myself and my parents. We don't. And the right to free movement and the ability to pursue a better life, pursue opportunities for ourselves, free from outside interference. We don't. There are basic rights. Israelis you, the rest of the world, enjoy. These are very basic things. You here in the audience or at home enjoy these sites, whether you are aware of it or not. Some of you are not even aware of it. The ability to move, to travel, to pursue your dreams, to marry the one you love, are not up for questions, thinking. But for us, those are rights that are denied. And I'm sure those who follow the situation back home know that there are only two ways in which the Palestinian people can seek fulfillment of our rights. Either in a state of our own, or in a state that treats all of its citizens equally. These are the two options. At the moment, this is not the case. And it has not been the case for a long time. Palestinians are neither equal citizens, nor do we have sovereignty over any inch of our native land. The primary reason for this is that Israel, the military stronger party, simply has not yet evolved at a point at which it is ready to accept that this conflict, between two parentheses, will only ever end when the Palestinian people, the indigenous population, enjoys its full and equal rights. Right from the beginning of the Oslo process, it was clear that the two-state solution was not really genuinely endorsed by the successive Israeli governments. We were forced by the international community to adopt the two-state solution, thinking that the international community will play the role of the guarantor and the enforcer of that vision. But there was absolutely, year after year, experience after experience, reluctance on the part of Israel and the international community to actually go ahead and implement. Secondly, the most important aspect of the business where we are is the Israeli settlement project on the occupied territory, which never stopped since we at least signed the Oslo Accords. Started long before, started since 1967, but since we signed the Oslo Accords, the size of settlements, the number of settlements have quadrupled, making the West Bank look more like a Swiss cheese than one connected piece of land. Now this latter, the settlement expansion, is the most crucial factor. Political discourse can change. We can change our discourse, our narratives, our words to describe things over time with the political will if we have it, but bricks and mortar actually need to be physically removed. Once I had a friend of mine playing an interesting term that Palestine is being built out of existence. And it is. Built out of existence by concrete. And it is, and will be very hard, actually, to reverse these very clear intentions of not allowing for Palestinian state. It was a sign that Israel was never going to allow for the emergence, and when I say Israel, I mean the Israeli government, for a kind of a viable Palestinian state, let alone on the 1967 boundaries as stipulated by international legitimacy. After all, what are the settlements but a de facto claim on a piece of land? That's the crux. If I build a house on this strip of land, I am not doing it because I believe this land will go away. Build it because I intend to keep it, and I build it as an act of annexation of that. Yeah. So every settlement, let me remind you, my friends, and this is international law, international resolutions, including UN Security Council resolution that the United Kingdom voted for only a couple of years ago, 2016. Very clearly defines settlements, defines the occupation, the wars as illegal. And international law considers settlements to be war crimes. The transfer of population from the occupying power state to the occupier is a war crime. The existence of settlements and their construction were and remain the single biggest obstacle to achieving the kind of a two-state outcome that the entire peace process that we have been engaged in the last 30 years, now over a quarter of a century, to be precise, has really been an obstacle that we have been unable to actually overcome. And my friends, the whole process was from the beginning meant to involve the international community. The whole thing was international from start to end. And first and foremost, the United States of America. Your beautiful country. It was, in fact, based on the idea that the international community would act as a guarantee that the process remained faithful to the resolutions of the international community, to the resolutions of the international law. And ultimately, as midwives, the international community will be the midwife for the state of Palestine to emerge and for peace to prevail. However, for that to be successful, it needed political will. It needed enforcement. We did not just need mediators, we needed a policeman, an international policeman, to enforce the law. Because what is the law if it lacks enforcement? No one will heed it. But this did not happen. The international community generally, but the US in particular, instead adopted a strange carrots and more carrots and bigger carrot approach. To the extent that there were pressure on Israel, it was always wrapped in possible reward. Israel was offered only inducements, more loan guarantees, more military aid, more financial assistance, better trade deals, or indeed all of the above, in order to secure Israel's compliance. That was the point. Or if they built more settlement, they can have it there, violating international law there, let's give them more carrots. That may bring them to compliance. By the way, that was the policy. Never, not one single time over all these years, was the strict approach with Israel attended. And by strict, I mean the consequence. Because if a policeman does not pose as a person who can attach consequences, law will not be applied. Or any individual. Nobody will take you seriously. And Israel will. Never at once, as I said, Israel told that if it continued with this illegal settlement construction, that is killing the very project of the international community, it would suffer consequences. Whether those were about taking away loan guarantees, less military assistance, less financial aid, revoking of trade deals, or indeed all of the above. In the US Congress, a couple of months ago, something interesting happened in that way. Some senators, Congress people said, and actually they stopped military law and military aid until Israel abides by the US laws in the area of two-state solution, settlements, human rights. But it was soon actually approved. Thus, if continued settlement construction represents the biggest physical obstacle to the process I understand. And the failure of the international community to hold Israel accountable for this construction, which, let me remind you again, is not only illegal under international law, but our plan, is the single biggest diplomatic obstacle to making peace. I have been in the West Bank only recently, and to Gaza, and to East Jerusalem. Only 3 years ago, I used to live in Ramallah. We had the center of the West Bank, Palestinian city. This is the occupied West Bank. Now, the center, the civic center, the urban center of the West Bank is becoming the settlements. The main infrastructure that connects these settlements, the main roads, are for the settlements, not for the Palestinians. Slowly, we are becoming inside. We are, in other words, my friend, let me just conclude this point, in the grip of a failed. It failed in conception and it failed in execution. And my friends, is there any sign of hope with a new Israeli Prime Minister and the new US administration, Mr. Biden? Many are asked. A very relevant question. We have suffered from the previous two in Tel Aviv and in Washington. Well, we wish the new Prime Minister Naftali Bennett of Israel who rise to power may have brought sign of relief in some capitals around the world, where world leaders grew tired of the intransigence and manipulation of Benjamin Netanyahu. But Bennett and Netanyahu are cut from the very same. Already Bennett has been quite upfront, public. He said there will be no Palestinian state on his watch. There will be no end to settlement construction on his watch. This is what he said. And he said it in Washington when he was by President. And there will be no return to negotiations with the Palestinian side on his watch. He repeated this 3 no's. You can't make your position clearer than that. And while Donald Trump's administration was a real no-brainer, it was. President Joe Biden has only ever suggested that he might go back to the situation that obtained before Trump, rather than others. At most, he would seek to reignite the same process, those fatal shortcomings I had this time. To go back to regrettably a failed attempt at peace. Moreover, of course, the U.S. is institutionally biased towards this, which is almost, that is Israel, a domestic issue in America rather than a foreign concern. A domestic. I was the last serving Palestinian ambassador to the U.S. I saw this very first time. Indeed, it was Trump's decision, the Trump's administration decision, to close the PLO office, the Palestinian mission in Washington, that directly caused me to be appointed here, to the United Kingdom. So I have that to thank Mr. Trump for, actually. I enjoy the Trump. Something good came out of Trump. But this administration could make these wild decisions because Israel collects opinions among U.S. politicians in a way no other foreign policy issue, or indeed domestic issue even does. On no other topic is there even close to the same level of bipartisanship in Washington. Support, unconditional, regardless of the U.S. policy, the U.S. interests, strategic interests, international resolutions, international law. For this reason, the U.S. cannot be considered a fair mediator like that. That's the bottom line. It cannot be considered, as far as Israel is concerned and Palestine is concerned, a fair, honest, credible mediator. In any case, should Biden even get so far as to even talk about reviving the peace process, and until now Washington has not shown any real appetite to properly engage in it. There are no appetite. No appetite. But even if they do, pursuing the same process will result in the same failure that it always has. Otherwise, Einstein will be absolutely unhappy about this if we do the same mistakes and expect different results. For us, the Palestinian people, this is simply not good enough, not anymore. 30 years is long enough. We started in 1991, exactly 30 years ago, the Madrid peace process, which was followed by the Oslo peace process 2 years later. 30 years is the life of a generation. You see, not only did the Oslo process fail, what it actually amounted to was telling the Palestinian people, us, that for as long as the process was ongoing, we have to accept to live without rights. So as long as there is a process, we have to accept to live without rights. Almost, not almost, exactly saying that the process replaces, substitutes your rights. So it's been about lasting process rather than lasting peace for all these years. Live without your rights. Try imagining that for a minute. In this case, this is what it means. A foreign government, over which you have no influence. We have no influence. We do not vote for who is in government or who is in parliament. We have no right to vote. It's a foreign government controls our land, decides whether or not you can travel, since it controls the border, it decides what goods and products you can or cannot consume, import or export, since again it controls the borders. A foreign government decides where you can live, since it oversees the ID card issuance, and that ultimately determines where on your own land you can stay. I was born in Gaza, and I studied in the West Bank, my undergraduate at BSA, a very renowned academic institution like yours, Frederick. And because I was from Gaza, I could not live in the West Bank. And all of a sudden, the last 3 years of my bachelor's degree, it was 4 years, I could not live in one address, fearing that actually they would come and arrest you and send you back to Gaza if you're lucky. If you are less lucky, you will end up in jail. And the foreign government, over whose courts we have no say, can even decide if you should be allowed to walk free or can be detained without trial or charge. We have hundreds. Without trial, without charge, without evidence. Sound. Those are the kinds of rights we are being asked to forego in the hope that a negotiation process might lead to some result at some indeterminate point in the future. Would you? And for how long? And every time we try to seek out, they say, hang on, you have to go back to negotiations. You would say, we've been over-negotiating, and this has been 30 years. Why don't we have our rights? Why negotiate? Why do you link our rights to an outcome? Or is it the intention to actually freeze our rights? Or freeze, I should have said. Well, you might at least once, like we did, that one time you might believe the promises of the international community. So we did believe in the 90s, the early 90s, the promises of the international community that they will act as an honest mediator, guarantor of international law, and you might actually attempt at accepting such a form. But once bitten, twice shy, as they say. And we have been bitten for a long, long time, decades. And when we see that time and time again Israel is allowed to break international law without consequences, we lose faith. Certainly, all Palestinian attempts at appealing to international bodies and resolutions, whether at the International Criminal Court, I'm sure some of you who study law or interested in international relations have been following the case, our case at the ICC. Whether we are pursuing the ICC or the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva or anywhere else, we are constantly met with vetoes and warnings. That includes the UK, by the way, the UK government, which has bluntly said that it does not support holding Israel to account at the ICC, and which voted against our proposition at the UN Human Rights Council. And our proposition was, after the last war on Gaza, and the attempts at removing people from their homes, eviction in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem, we wanted to establish a UN independent inquiry to investigate what has happened. Superpower tell us to back up. So, if international actors like the UK and the US, on the other hand, promises that they stand on the side of international law and look to international resolutions for a just outcome for Palestinians and Israelis. But then, that's what they tell us every single morning, every single day, every term, that they abide by international law, international resolutions, the two-state solution. I'm sure you hear these statements all the time. And they want to see a just outcome for the Palestinian-Israeli situation. But then, the same actors prevent us from reaching out to the very institutions meant to enforce that rule of law. What conclusion should we draw? What conclusion would you draw? One conclusion is clear, my friends. The Oslo process has long been finished by Israel and its elected. As I described, the national phenomenon of building settlements, land grab, house evictions, house demolitions, and what have you. The wall, the checkpoints, has made a mockery of even the provision of Oslo that it has signed. And the outside role of the US in mediating between us and Israel will not be there. Almost 30 years is long enough. and the pursuit to get more confidence-building measures in the absence of a clear outcome, and in order to placate a right wing in Israel, just to keep them calm, quite honestly, is simply an answer. We have private money. If we are going to engage in any kind of negotiations towards a two-state solution, those negotiations must be, my friends, clearly based on the framework of international law and international business. The focus, in other words, must be on how to implement these resolutions and not what to implement. For all these years, the focus is what to implement from the international law. So when the world comes and decides that, okay, we will cut our land, we will have two states, two sovereign equal states, and the Palestinians will be given 22% of the land, of our land, 22%. We accept, we go for a process. Heinous it is, long it is. And then it becomes not about the international clear line, it becomes about how much they can negotiate out of the 22%. So they don't want to meet us somewhere between Tel Aviv and Jericho, they want to meet us somewhere between Jerusalem and Jericho. If you know geography, you know what I mean. And also, dear my friends, the role of the international community must be narrowed and sharpened to that of collectively ensuring and enforcing compliance with international law. Otherwise, we're going to see the same movie again and again as we did. That way lies possibility and hope, by abiding by international resolutions, because that was a historic compromise already, and by having real, meaningful enforcement. We have asked for exactly such a peace conference at the UN with those very parameters. We have. This is our initiative. President Abbas's initiative, Palestinian leadership and people initiative. But however, so far to no avail. Look, my friends, yes, we invoke international law. We do invoke international law. I was born in a refugee camp in the very south of Gaza. The United Nations took care of me and my generation, my people. I was educated by the UN, by UNRWA, fed by them, provided health service by them. So we do invoke international law because we feel it should grant us some form of and some measure of justice. Indeed, yes. But we also invoke international law because we are internationalists. We do believe in internationalism. We believe in the global rules-based system. We believe that that rules-based system is essential for world peace and for the possibility of justice. We recognize that that system, flawed though it may be in some areas, our international order, flawed though it may be in some areas, came out of a genuine attempt post-World War II to never again allow ourselves to descend into such barbaric mass slaughter of Israelis. That's the essence of international order. Never again. We subscribe to the view that absent this global rules-based system, we are back to the rule of the jungle. And look around us. Look all over the world and you'll see that if this system crumbles completely, we will go back to the rule of the jungle. And for that, we will all pay a heavy price as our grandfathers did, particularly in this country. In Europe. This is no place to be. Not anymore, my friends. We as a human species should be better than that. And still, when we ask the international community to implement its own rules, we are, of course, aware that we are asking for precisely the kind of political will that so far has been notable only for its absence. So what other options do we have? That's the question. Well, let me remind you that the two-state solution was presented to the Palestinian leadership people as the most practical path to freedom from occupation and the shortest, if you like, route, as they say in America, route for the Palestinian people to enjoy our full rights equal to all others. That was presented to us. A lot of pressure in the 70s and the 80s. Take the two-state solution. endorse international resolutions. A sovereign independent state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital is your shortest route to peace and to equal rights. The key here is not the outcome, but the practical effect. The practical effect. The key here is the ability to enjoy our rights regardless of the outcome, regardless of the process. It is this, or before that, if this is not going to happen in a state of our own, we will adjust. We will adjust. We will not rebel. We will just have to adjust. If the international community does not blatantly take the steps we are asking, i.e. asking for and enforcing compliance with international law from Israel, then we must conclude that there is no hope for a two-state solution. And ourselves start a strategic adjusting process to achieve, accomplish, enjoy our rights. This is neither a threat, my friends, nor a promise. This is what I'm saying. We have to adjust. It's neither a threat nor a promise. This is simply the reality today. This is what we live today. However, you twist it and turn it, the fundamental reality on the ground is this. Between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, there is parity in numbers between Jewish and non-Jewish population. There is equal numbers between Palestinians and Israelis. Actually, we are a little bit more in numbers. In that same area, there is right now just one sovereign state, that is Israel, overseeing separate legal systems for different peoples. Hence, the apartheid reality of the current situation, which has been extensively talked about, described, documented by numerous Palestinian, Israeli, and international human rights organizations. The last was the Human Rights Watch from New York, a very extensive report about Israel crossing the threshold of apartheid. That apartheid reality, my friends, which we live today, and I might remind you here again that apartheid is a crime against humanity, can only resolve itself in one of two ways. How do you resolve apartheid? How do you resolve one group controlling the lives of the other group without the other group having any say over their own fate? How do you resolve this? Separate but equal sovereign states, that's the first formula. Separate but equal states, and this is what we have tried for the last century and failed. Or as equal citizens in one state. Can you give me a third formula? Can we think of a third formula? These are the only two formulas. Thus far, we have accepted the international formula of two states because the world also wants to ensure that Israel remains to be majority Jewish population. And we also wanted to find a shortest cut to our rights. We wanted our new generations to live in peace. We had enough of our own kids being murdered, killed, bounded, imprisoned, our land being taken, our houses being demolished. So we were absolutely keen on a process that would deliver as soon as possible. But we have to look around, pause, and see what is ahead of us. And how do we navigate strategically our way out. There are no other possibilities, at least if one is to take the aspiration, the true aspiration, the genuine aspiration, the righteous aspirations of the Palestinian people seriously. One thing is for certain, the Palestinian people will not be dislodged from our land. That experience of 1948 will not be. Never again. Our history is long and proud. Our heritage, our traditions are firmly established, and we are bound in with our connection to our home. Ours is a very accomplished nation, my friends. I'm sure you have many Palestinians studying here in Cambridge. I'd love to meet them afterwards. Educated, ambitious people, all over. We have 13.5 million now. We have innovators and artists. I just received one of them only last week in my office. A Palestinian student girl who just designed the first ever Palestinian satellite, and her project is to be the first to launch Palestinian satellite into space. She inspired me. She's at Miss Mary. That was their graduation project. We have intellectuals and scientists. Everywhere you look, there is a poet that is Palestinian or an engineer that inspires the Arab world, inspires the rest of the world. And everywhere Palestinians have gone in their exile in this world, wherever we have done in the exile, and look around, you will see how much the Palestinian community have enriched the host countries, have contributed to building these countries, to the well-being and the prosperity of these countries. Okay. We will not long be denied our rights, therefore, my friend. It's been long enough. But the shape of the struggle ahead of us could look very different to how it has looked for the past several decades. That's my key message. What is coming could look extremely different. Whatever happens, it will be something to look out for, all of us together. And the UK, by omission or commission, can play a critical role in this. So, can you, and here I'll end my things. Because Palestine is not just the Palestinian people. Palestine is not just about the Palestinians. Palestine is about all people. Palestine is about all people. Palestine is about the rules-based global system. Palestine is about equality of rights. Palestine is about you as well. And don't take my word for it. Think back to May this year and to those global show of solidarity, global demonstrations against Israel's attempt to dislodge families from Sheikh Jarrah and East Jerusalem. And its deadly offensive on the other side. You've seen the streets of London, Cambridge, and the other place, and I mentioned Oxford, and the other place. And everywhere in the United Kingdom, especially by you, by the students, the youngsters, progressives, the ones who study the actual international law and know the reality, and all the tens of thousands of people everywhere who took to the streets around the globe did so because they believe the world can be and must be a better place. But in order for that to happen, my friends, we must all be held accountable, all of us, to the same rules, to the same laws, and to the same standards. No exception. No exception. We must all, be it British, American, Israeli, Palestinian, whoever you are, we must all be held accountable to the very same standards, laws, values. Values can never be subdivided. You don't cherry pick. You here tonight as future thought leaders of our world, you will have to grapple with these issues, my friends. You must. As we have been doing for my own generation. But it's upon you now to grapple with these issues. Not only our issues, but global issues. And you know, the corona has taught us one lesson. Crazy those who think they can live in isolation. Stupid those who think we can stop thinking beyond our own borders. And you will have to work out what kind of world you want to live in and how best to secure it. I assure you that as Nelson Mandela once said, there is no justice in the world without justice for the Palestinians. Another statement by another great man, injustice somewhere is injustice everywhere. I'm sure you will come to agree with that. And this gives me, and this gives us hope to see the new generations of the UK, the new generations of the world, the ones at respected, renowned places like Cambridge, are really taking the torch to actually make our world a better world. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your very passionate speech. Now, there are a lot of people here, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions, so I think we will go straight to audience questions. So please put up your hand if you have one, and we will get a mic to you. Yes, over here.
Is this on? Okay, great. Earlier in your speech, you said that you believe the U.S. cannot be an impartial negotiator. I completely agree. So given the stranglehold that support for Israel has on U.S. politics, particularly Republican politics, do you see any way the U.S. could willingly step down as its role as a lead negotiator?
That's one of the problems. The U.S. is neither capable to nor willing to forego that role. Under the sheer pressure of Israeli argument that they will only accept a U.S. mediation. Because the Israeli perception is that everybody else would be simply neutral, or at least as neutral as possible. The European Union, Russia, South Africa with its experience, Brazil and Latin America. So the Israel would always accept a process mediated by the US. But that was already 15 years ago. Israel now doesn't even accept a process mediated by the US. That is not good enough for them. The question here, my friend, does the US wants to see peace in our region? And I believe yes. Big yes. I believe this is a strategic goal for the US because it's a strategic region, and this conflict is costing all of us real tangible consequences, cost. And I think the American people and the American establishment also cares for Israel and for the Palestinian people. And I happen to have many friends in your capital and elsewhere, and I know they really do care. The question is not of intention, the question is of capacity and capability. So they have the strategy, the policy is not matched by the will and the ability to do it. There was a brief moment of the US history when that will started coming out. During Bush Senior time, I must say, and I must disappoint you, it was not a Democratic administration, it was a Republican administration when James Baker, if you remember that statesman, stood in the press conference and gave his number live on TV, and he said at the time the Israeli Prime Minister was Shamir. He gave the phone number of the Foreign State Department, and he said, Shamir, when you are ready and serious, call me. And then he left, and they actually froze the military loans to Israel for a couple of weeks, and Israel came screaming to the Madrid process. That was the one time real pressure was exerted. I want to end my answer with this. If you want my opinion, the one most promising hope we have right now, and I hope my European friends will not be unhappy about this, is coming from the US. But it's not coming from the top politicians. What you described is still at large as far as the political elites. But what we are following, and as I was the last ambassador, I am very keen, I'm engaging, I'm following. What is most inspiring in the US is your generation. My God. And I tell you, what we see in the progressive movement, what we see in the intersectionality of the US public, I mean the Black Lives Matter, and their understanding of Palestine and their real support of Palestine, what we see from the Latino communities, what we see from the church community, what we see from the American people is a beginning to end that long practice of bias. It might take some time, but I believe in America the biggest change is happening bottom up as we speak, and I don't want to quote you names, but there are many great names that give us hope that the tide is turning in the United States of America.
Good evening, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Kavita Mohanty. I come from India. Briefly, before I started studying at Cambridge, I had the good fortune of working for Afghan refugees back in India, working on their documentation. And when you were speaking about the stories, I've firsthand witnessed the trauma that they have undergone running away from their countries with maybe just say a bag of suitcase, just for saving their lives and coming to start a new life back in India. My question is, given that I'm a staunch supporter, of course, of international law and I'm studying that at Cambridge, the issue is that by and large, international law has got problems with its implementation. And secondly, I see when it comes to international politics as well, you have the big state actors and the superpowers who are kind of navigating their way across it. That's not hidden to the world. My concern is that given that state interest is always going to be vital of these big superpowers, how are we going to go ahead and bring about, of course, yes, justice, but my issue is nobody is willing to compromise. And like you've said, 30 years have passed. Are we still going to go ahead and just see war? Because, like you said, Palestine is ready for the two alternative solutions. But unless and until the big superpowers go ahead and compromise on some structure, I don't understand how is that going to work out. You're going to have mass influx all throughout the world, and borders, unfortunately, are treating refugees really obnoxiously, if I could say that. I've seen it myself. Sorry for the long question, but thank you so much.
Well, this is really the relevant question, my friend. How do we do international affairs, given the disproportionate power of key countries? I mean, when the US sits on a table, the table is like that. We understand. We understand. I mean, the law is very clear. You don't need lawyers to, I was giving a speech just last week and I was saying, stop telling us about our rights, we know them. And stop telling us about international law, we know it. Tell us about the implementation and the enforcement. So we have an issue there. I am struggling to answer your question. What would be the best way forward? But I think there are two tracks to answering your question. The first is practical now. It has to do with the world really understanding that they have to give up a bit of their sovereignty right now for international order to function. Given what we have just witnessed in Afghanistan, where you just served, and it would be a self-interest by these superpowers and by these great countries, a self-interest because of the influx of refugees, because of all the security, economic, socio, what have you, issues, that they will come to terms that what Trump did over the last 4 or 5 years was absolutely dangerous in terms of diminishing the value of and weakening the international institutions. He was so anti-internationals, it was clear. That's the first possibility, which is not happening. The second, I must say, international issues like Palestine are international. They are global issues. You can never think of Palestine as a domestic issue. I mean, Palestinian refugees are all over. They are in Malmö, Sweden right now, and of course Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. So it's not an issue that is purely domestic or internal. So is any other issue. So there are global issues. Climate change. Glasgow will be hosting the COP26. This is, go do it in the UK only and not do it in China or elsewhere. So how do you do global politics? I think global politics require global parties. If you want my very fantasy-like answer. Because why would they, I don't know, the Liberal Democrats Party of the UK, just as an example, or decide on a matter that is in, I don't know, in Indonesia? They don't have the interest. So while we have mainly global issues, we don't have global politics. We have only domestic politics. And domestic politics can never qualify itself and bring itself to the level of global politics. And that's why we're stuck. Because America was supposed to lead the global order vis-à-vis Israel-Palestine, but it was stuck in the domestic, as I said in my introductory remark. And I aspire one day that your generation will actually start saying, hang on, we also need to have international parties, global parties, parties that can recruit youngsters and members from all over the world to actually deal with international issues, with global issues. We cannot leave it to the whim and to the limits of domestic politics. Politicians, I know some of them, I know them. I was one and I'm still one. Politicians do not think 10 years, let alone 50 years from now. They don't have the interest. You know, if Israeli politicians think of the interest of the Israelis 50 years from now, they will immediately come to a conclusion and a solution. Now, but politicians care about the today, the 10 p.m. news, you know, what the public is going to do. Seriously, how they keep, you know, maneuvering, keep their seat. Such politicians can actually deal with an issue like the climate change? You really think? In a very credible, lasting manner. So initiate a process where you start a global political party, and I'll subscribe to that.
Good evening. Can you all hear me? Good evening, Ambassador. To begin with, thank you very much for your presence with us today. Thank you for the strength of your words and for sharing the tough reality that people of Palestine live every day. You mentioned in your speech holding each of us accountable. My question for you today would be, what can any of us here as lay people, do to support people from Palestine? What are the specific actions that you would like people like us to take so that we can also help to your cause? Thank you very much. My name is Laura. I'm Romanian. My background is in engineering, so yeah, I don't know much about international law, I'm afraid.
Your question, and it's the most important question. And you can start, Laura, by actually relaying the truth. A big part of our agony for the last so many years, more than 70, 75 years, is that the truth has been blinded. The actual situation has been twisted. Wherever I go in Western media, it is presented as if there is some sort of two-sidism. And two-sidism, we have no army. We're just, you know, unarmed civilians captured and controlled. And the whole thing presented from a violence prism, violence framework. So in the last deadly aggressions against Gaza, and before it in Jerusalem, I was the guest of the main British, US. The starting point is always about our reaction, rather than the Israeli action that led to the reaction. So the power of words, the narrative, the story has not been delivered thanks to the international mainstream media here. And I must say, I'll take a hit at them. They have been part of our pain. For a long time, they have contributed, these traditional mainstream media, in actually twisting the facts, presenting our case in a very complicated matter, when in fact it's not. Talking about the situation as if there are some crazy bunch of people who are just kicking and screaming, and whenever Palestinians are mentioned, we are gunmen. Whenever Israelis are mentioned, it's defense, Israeli defense forces. So please help us challenge that, because I find it increasingly, thanks to the youth and to the power of the social media, people know that, oops, what we have been fed for all these years is not right. That's why you had the explosion of public opinion support in May, thanks to the social media. And our youth back in Palestine, you know, the youngsters, I'm sure you follow some of them, like Muhammad al-Kurd and the twins, and Mona al-Kurd, his sister, and many others all over, inspiring voice. That's number one. tell the story, please. And I'm happy to send you. Number two, visit Palestine. You will enjoy it. Forget about the situation. You will see the richness of the culture, the richness of the music and the people and the cuisine, the food. We have the best food, I can claim without any hesitation. And come and enjoy it. But when you come and see it, and when you really go through the experience, you will actually, it will be transformative. And it happens to be a very holy place. So you will have also a historic experience in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, and everywhere. I would recommend you come. And all of you, if you can make it, it will be a very, very lasting experience. Thirdly, you are a citizen of the world, and it's your right to decide that Israel is doing illegal stuff in these settlements. For instance, if these products are being sold illegally, and they are illegal, not me saying, the UN is saying, there's a database. Take action. Don't consume these products. You will never consume the ivory products, for instance, will you? Because ivory is clearly illegal. Citizen action is what matters. And I think if the governments of the world are not really having the will and the courage to actually take action, it is up to the citizens of the world, as they did with South Africa, the anti-apartheid movement, to start taking action to mark the illegalities. So these are the three things. But I look forward to receiving you in Palestine, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Noah. I'm a master's student. So throughout your argument, you invoked international law and you attributed fault to external actors, and you invited this audience, I think correctly, to feel moral outrage for the treatment of the Palestinian people. And I have sympathy for what the Palestinian people have suffered, and perhaps what you personally have suffered, and that's the truth that you referred to. Yet I struggle to believe that the Palestinian leadership bears no responsibility. And I would put the following to you. If Palestinians adopted a determined strategy of nonviolent resistance to expose the denial of your rights by the Israeli state, of winning over the hearts and minds of people around the world, instead of Hamas terrorizing innocents in Israel, where would the situation be right now? Because it seems that the powers that be, especially Hamas, stand to gain a lot from the status quo. They have an external enemy to gain for misgovernance of the population, for their governments also denying rights to the Palestinian people. But true leadership, embracing nonviolent resistance, would require giving agency to the Palestinian people. And my question is, how would the leadership of Hamas fare if people had agency, which begets democratic accountability? That seems to be another truth.
Thank you for the question very much. And I hear you, and I agree that we, the people and the leadership, have responsibilities too. Absolutely. One of these utmost important responsibilities is the adherence to our democratic process. Because who we are is not, we don't have a sovereign state, we don't have international superpowers behind our backs. All what we have is our people, and people like you, our friends. And if we don't draw ourselves from the very legitimacy of our people, we have no legitimacy. And I agree also that non-violence is the way forward. And I also believe that this has been the Palestinian leadership position for the last at least 15 years. Complete non-violence. And I returned from America to join my leadership because I want to be part of this inspiring non-violent strategy. And I went with my president to New York in 2011 to join the UN. and to use the UN tools to leverage our cause, to internationalize our cause. So did many of my fellow Palestinians joining the popular resistance in Palestine. Please follow the inspiring scenes in villages all over the West Bank, including in Sheikh Jarrah, and what these kids have done to protect by the use of their voices, not any other violent mean, by peaceful demonstrations. See, Google Beta. Beta is a Palestinian village next to Nablus, and see the beauty of the resistance using music to actually send off the illegal settlers from kicking them from their own land. So non-violence is what we adopted and is what we practice. But my friend, I also invite you to come and visit. If you resist non-violently, you are rounded in Israeli jails. All the leaders of the non-violent movement are being targeted. If you carry a Palestinian flag, you are rounded. And therefore, to think that there is, once we adopt non-violence, Israel will just respect us. Please think again. And as I said in my introductory remarks, when I, as a person who believes in non-violence, I really do, the power of non-violence, as opposed to a country, a state that has a nuclear army. And then we seek the ICC or the Human Rights Council, and then we are blocked from that. Then the message is to the ordinary that actually even non-violence is not available for you. Lastly, we have committed mistakes in our history. We did. And, you know, we are not united in every single sphere. The sheer pressure on us has made its own marks. Some of what we do needs a lot of justifications and thinking, and God help anybody to do so. So we're not saints. But please do not, and let's not draw any sort of equivalence between the occupied and the occupier, between the colonized and the colonizer, between the besieged and the besieger. There is no symmetry. And even if the occupied, the colonized, the besieged, the oppressed, that is the Palestinian people, even if they commit mistakes, this does not mean they don't qualify for their rights. That's illegal and immoral. Our rights are our rights. And I'm afraid some of the Israeli propaganda have used this argument to actually say, you know, look at Hamas, look at this, look at that, you know, to delay the inevitable. It's a pretext to actually not give us our rights. And I assure you, the moment our rights are attained, the potential between us and Israel is immense. Immense. There will be a blast. Maybe a Palestinian should not use the word a blast, but there will be a blast, an explosion of opportunities. Because Israel is a very high-tech country, very well connected to the Silicon Valley. Its economy is, you know, 42,000 per annum, GDP. Ours is the most educated. We almost have zero illiteracy rate. We have one of the highest PhD per capita graduates worldwide. A very young population, very young. The majority of us, the majority are less than 14 years old. So the combination and the strategic location, the historic sites, would just make this partnership a real experience. But many of what we hear from the official side there is a way to just lay the blame on the victim. Okay, for how long and how much the victim can be blamed.
We have time for one last question. The gentleman over there.
Sorry, mate, 1 second. Sorry, good evening. I'm Sean, also a student at Cambridge University. So I only have one question. Do you see any potential solution to the mutual distrust between the people of Israel and also people of Palestine? Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. Well, let me jokingly tell you, you think the Brits or the French trust each other? They don't. Maybe they do, I don't know, but I'm posing a question here. I don't want to create a international diplomatic row now. And I often do, by the way. International relations, and those who study international relations here will tell you it's not about trust and love and hate, and all these are invented by politicians. It isn't. It's about interests and rights. So, the Israelis have come to us in the early 90s and they said, listen, we are interested in peace, but we don't trust you, you don't trust us. Why don't we do a process for only 5 years so we trust each other, love each other, and then we go for the final? And we went for it, by the way. But then it proven to be actually the opposite of what we intended. Can you ever love your occupier and your oppressor while you are under occupation? Tell me, Sean, can you? By the way, this is a major part of the discussion. I deal with it in the UK Parliament every day. They say the Palestinian curriculum has incitement. I say, what is the incitement? Our curriculum is one of the best. International revisions show that we are very advanced. They say, no, because, you don't really talk about the trust with the Israelis. And I say, how can we teach our kids to love their jailer, their oppressor? And is it expected of us? Why am I giving you this rather longer? I don't think trust is what is needed in the first phase. What is needed in the first phase is to give people rights. And then when you give people their rights, I assure you, people are social animals. They will find their way to trust each other, to love each other, to intermarry from each other. They might surprise you. But you cannot have it the other way. You cannot expect trust, good relations, normalizations before a political solution, because it's putting the cart before the horse. And by the way, this summarizes for you the Oslo process. The Oslo process has placed the cart before the horse. The horse here is give people their rights. Let's have established neighborly two countries relationship. Let's try to have open borders, and see what people are capable to do by way of their interaction. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm afraid that's probably all the time we have today. I don't know if you'd be happy for people to approach you and take questions afterwards, because I'm sorry that we didn't get around to going to everyone. Do you want to take one more? Or? Okay, yeah, why don't we take one more?
I work with communities to help them benefit from their archaeology and cultural heritage. You invited Laura to visit Palestine, so I had a quick look to see what tourism you have there. And I was amazed at what I'm reading on Wikipedia. I know you're all told don't go to Wikipedia. It's a good start. What people have to go through to actually get into your country. It's just, I'm shocked. Let's start. Do you have a look? It's not that easy.
Yeah, but look at ours. It's not competition. You make it. And she will defy. Yes, there are so many restrictions, and the whole idea is to prevent. That's why I said number 2 priority is people come and visit, because the occupiers do not want you to see the reality. Not only the ugliness of the reality, but the beauty also. Because the moment you come in close proximity, close contact with the beauty of the Palestinian people, their culture, and the ugliness of the occupation, you form your own opinion and you become an ambassador for ending the injustice. That they don't need, and that's why they terrify anybody who approaches the Ben Gurion airport. They send you for 6 hours, they interrogate you, they take away your mobile, don't take your laptop with you, they will offload everything. But the key message for them, don't come back. But people are coming, and especially the youth. They take English courses in Birzeit University, where I studied. They enjoy their time, and no matter what, in the end, there are international expectations. So they cannot send away a British citizen or an American citizen. They just give you a hard time. So Laura, read the Google, prepare yourself, and come to Palestine.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador, and thank you to everyone who asked questions. I'm sorry we didn't get down while I'm here, it would be remiss of me if I didn't plug the union very briefly. We are still in our open period, so some of you may not be members currently and have come to this event, but we will be doing members-only events from a couple of days on throughout the rest of the term. So if you haven't got your membership yet, then I would highly recommend that you do so that you can continue to come throughout the term. But thank you, Ambassador, and yeah, thank you. Let's give you another round of applause.